Earlier this year, I spent over $20,000 filming a passion project, and in this behind the scenes video, I'm going to share the most important lessons that I learned along the way. But first, a little bit of context and a bit of an overview as to why this whole thing came together in the first place. I was presented the opportunity by Sony Australia to show them what I could do with the Sony Burano. I thought if I'm going to do it, then let's do it properly. So I invested a bunch of my money to make something for my portfolio that really helps me stand out in the action sports world. And ultimately, hopefully it gains me clients, but ultimately gets me where I'm trying to go in my career 10 years from now. One of my career bucket list goals is to be shooting snowboard documentaries for brands like Red Bull Media House. I know that geographically shooting in the snow is quite hard from where I live here in Adelaide, Australia. So I thought the next best thing is to fill out that action sports portfolio to hopefully use as an in to get in with certain clients and agencies like Red Bull Media House. So I looked at this as an opportunity to build relationships with the right people in the industry to get me where I'm professionally trying to go. Which leads me to the first lesson, and that is that relationships are absolutely everything. This won't be the first time, nor will it be the last time that I say on this channel that relationships really are everything, be that personally or professionally. This whole project came about because I have a great relationship with Sony that was built over 8 or 10 years working at a local camera store. Having a good relationship with a brand isn't just about trying to get free stuff to make content, it's about having relationships with people behind the brands. I'm pretty fortunate to have some good contacts at Sony that I know quite well personally, and it's been a joy knowing them over the last 8 to 10 years. And it's when you have those personal relationships that when an opportunity comes and they go, hey, we're going to loan you a $40,000 camera for 6 weeks, no strings attached, go make something cool. That doesn't happen to just anyone on the street. And I'm not trying to say that to big myself up. It was just the opportunity I was presented with. And of course, when that opportunity comes, you say, yes, please. Another relationship that was really crucial in making this film come together the way it did was Brad Day from Divide Productions. I've worked with Brad for the last 4 or 5 years or so, and when I was talking to him about potentially buying a tracking arm and a Ronin 2 for this project, he said, hey man, I'm not using mine for the period you need it, just borrow mine. Which was absolutely incredible to be able to lend that free of charge, saved me almost $15,000, $20,000, and I can't be more thankful for that. There is one more relationship we will touch on a little bit more later, but just think about whatever relationships you have in what you're trying to build. And are you just trying to get stuff out of it, or are you trying to actually invest back into those as well? The second lesson is pre-production is the most important type of production, and don't bite off more than you can chew. Any of the downfalls or things I do differently next time, or the constructive criticism we've received, can all be traced back to not spending enough time on the finer details in pre-production. Now, me not giving this enough time in pre-production wasn't because I've been lazy. This came down to a few factors. This was the biggest production I'd ever taken on my own. I was trying to plan everything, work out what we're going to do. I was also talking to a lot of brands who were setting gear to be a part of this production. And every brand that committed and wanted to be a part of things, fantastic. But that also meant I had to then make a little bit of content for them. So I had like 13 different things. I was trying to make little bits of content here or there. I was trying to plan out what I was making for them, as well as trying to make this motocross documentary. And at the same time, I thought we can make an astrophotography documentary and maybe a little short film as well. In hindsight, that is a lot of work to take on for, I'm going to say one person because I was the person organizing it all and trying to write everything and kind of build it all together. I did have a team, Kim and Aaron, who worked with us as well. But for the most part, all the content for the brands and the planning and producing and all that kind of fell on my shoulders. So when you're taking on that many responsibilities, it's really hard to give the time of day to really settle down on one project at a time. So if I was to do this again, I would just go, this is the one project we're going to do, and we're going to give all of our time and effort to this one thing to make it the best thing possible. Now, I'm still super happy with how it came out, but that's the thing. You do these projects, you'll learn and get better for the next one that you do. I'd like to think the next project I do will be even better because I will dedicate all that time in pre-production to making sure everything is perfect and ready to go when it comes time to actually execute. The third lesson is that collaboration is the true key to success. Now, before I mentioned that there was another relationship that I was going to talk about, and that is probably the most important one for this whole project, and that is Kim Saywell. Kim has helped in every aspect of this film. When I knew I had this opportunity, I hit Kim up straight away. We do a lot of different work together. And I was like, hey dude, this is what I want to do. Do you want to be a part of it? And I cannot thank Kim enough. He donated like 4 to 6 weeks of his labor completely unpaid, as well as gear as well to the production. This film and the other things we're working on at the same time couldn't have happened without Kim in any shape or form. Right from the pre-production, Kim was jumping into anything that he could. When I decided that I wanted to turn my soccer mum SUV into a tracking vehicle, I gave him some pictures and some rough drawings, and he really made it all happen. That car had no business coming out as good as it did for the price that we spent. I was able to save so much money just straight down to Kim's ability and knowledge in the DIY environment. I'm a bit of an ideas man. Kim is an ideas man as well as a do it man. I don't know how to be super handy with all those things. So to have Kim on my team being able to build things with CNCs and just fabricate things from thin air was absolutely incredible. So I obviously really hope that these projects do well, not only for my own success, but also for people like Kim to gain extra work out of them as well. Collaborating with Kim wasn't just about getting him to build me some cool toys. Kim and I are very, very similar, but we see things very differently at times. When I focus on an edit and I go down one path, he's always thinking about it from a different direction. So when you come into an edit and you both have very different opinions, sometimes that can cause a clash, but other times it can help refine an idea. You just have to be open to listening to other opinions, because at the end of the day, you're not always right. You're never going to be the best at everything. You're going to be better at some people than some things, but weaker in other areas. And it's through that collaboration where everyone comes together and they bring their own unique strengths and talents, you're going to be able to mold that artwork into the best piece of art possible. Sometimes it can be really hard to swallow your ego, step back and say, do you know what? I'm going to let that person take the reins in this situation. But ultimately, if what you care about is the project and the outcome and not some stupid little title, then that's what you need to do. You need to make sure you're always collaborating and always building a better piece of art. Now, not only did Kim and I collaborate on this, but we also had Aaron come out and collaborate with us as well. Aaron's a film student who's far too good to be a film student, but it's great to have his ideas and opinions on set, because everyone comes with their own unique taste and their own unique opinion, which when you put those together is where the art really comes to life. This next one might be a little bit controversial and some people might disagree, and that's fine. That's gear matters. There are times where gear just matters. Story is always going to be king, and that's what you should focus on. But there are times, like we decided to film at 25 frames a second on the Burano and 800 frames a second in 5K on the Free Flight Ember, to really give that push and pull of the raw, gritty nature of motorcycling, but then that fine detail, the slowness to kind of give that expression of art. You can't get 5K Super 35, 800 frames a second for $2,000 on an iPhone. It just doesn't happen. You can't get the quality of a Burano for a fraction of the price. Yes, it's fantastic cameras at much cheaper price points, but the reason cameras are the certain prices that they are is because of the technologies and the capabilities that are built inside them. And there are times where if you're trying to tell a story in a certain way and you want a certain sort of output, you just have to use a certain sort of equipment. Now, never let that get in the way of telling a story the best way possible. But for us in this situation, there were times where gear just mattered. We were in some really challenging conditions: off-road, dust, dirt, sand, salt. We were in the outback Australian sun, 42 degrees Celsius for 4 days in a row, and the Burano just powered through like it was no one's problem. There's certain cameras that overheat in a studio environment, so being able to have a camera that you can push to the limits in some really extreme conditions are things that we just didn't have to worry about because we had the right gear with us on the shoot. Now, I'm not saying that as a way to get fixated on the next piece of gear that you can buy, because we all know in the camera game, we all love new toys, but there are times when you have a certain project in mind, you just need a certain piece of equipment. So always try and tell the best story possible, but there are going to be times where gear and story do collide, and for us, this film was a great example. The next lesson I learned is never be afraid to ask other people's opinions, even if they're not necessarily in the industry. When I was in post on this film, I did about 5 complete start to finish builds on this thing, and I just couldn't get something I was happy with. And on that 5th build, I felt a little bit more like I liked where this thing was going, but there was something wrong with it. And I got my wife to come in and take a look, and she watched it through once and she just went, oh, I'd move that there, I'd do this there, I'd do that there. And I'd spent so long on this film at that point, probably like 200 something hours in the edit. And I just stepped back, I did the changes she made, and it just all came together. Sometimes when you're so deep in a project, you're so focused, you've got your blinders on and you can't see the forest from the trees. When my wife came in and told me what changes to make, she was able to look at things with clean, fresh eyes. Whereas my eyes were so narrowed in on what I thought was the way to go that when I got a little bit of outside opinion from someone who's not even in the industry, I was able to step back, make these changes and go, wow, that's completely changed how things look. So don't be afraid to ask someone else's opinion. It's another form of collaboration that's really going to make your project come out the best way possible. Because at the end of the day, you might be the one telling the story, but you're not the only one that gets to experience it. The next thing is network, and network. Networking is something I hate to do. I'm a pretty laid back person and I never like to talk about myself or big up myself and try and sell what I'm trying to work on. But sometimes you just got to bite the bullet and do it. So when we were fortunate enough to get 3 nominations at the International Motor Film Awards in London, I wasn't going to go. But my wife said, you got to go. You got to go there. You got to meet the people, do the networking and just see what comes of it. So I got on some pretty last minute flights and went over to London to the International Motor Film Awards. Unfortunately, we didn't win anything. Like, we lost to Mission Impossible in the best stunts category, which was kind of cool to be able to say that we were up against Formula 1 and Mission Impossible. But I met some really cool people, had some great conversations, and now it's just a waiting game. You just never know how long that will take to pay itself off. Sometimes things pay off immediately, you get a call and you get a job, but other times they take a long time. It might not be 3, 4, 5 years. For instance, when I got back from London, I got 2 phone calls and both of them were people I'd met with 3 years prior, and I hadn't had any contact for 3 years, and they both had to shoot for me within the next month. So for me, going over to London was all about networking and building relationships with other people in the industry who maybe potentially in years to come might have a job for. So if you include the trip to London, this film has cost me roughly 30 grand all in. I will say that while doing this, I've had about 10 grand of jobs already come in as a direct result of people watching the film. Some of those were actually even behind the scenes before the film was even out. So while it's only early days and the film's only been out for about a month at this point of recording this video, it's actually starting to pay itself off and prove that it was a worthwhile adventure. Even as much as you hate doing it and you hate selling yourself, don't be afraid to get out there and mention the things that you're proud of. Mention what you've been working on and say, hey, look, it was nominated for some awards or we were fortunate enough to win some, because your network is going to turn into relationships, and that ultimately is what's going to feed your family for years to come. The next lesson that I learned, which was one of the most important lessons that I learned along the way, was just remember when to be calm. One of the things that I planned in pre-production was I really wanted all the drone visuals to match as closely as possible to the Burano footage. So I'd planned to get an FPV pilot to pilot a senior lift with my FX6. I had all these plans for FPV shots I wanted. I really wanted the FX6 and I desperately wanted to get the Free Fly Ember up on that drone as well to get some epic, super slow motion drone shots. However, on the 3rd flight, this happened. Unfortunately for us, more propellers were damaged than we had spare. Fortunately though, the FX6, the 10mm Voigtlander and the drone itself were actually all fine, but this just meant we couldn't fly any more senior lift for the rest of the day. So for me, kind of devastating to be honest with you, because I had so many plans of what I wanted shots wise and we didn't get any super slow-mo up in the air. In that moment when that drone went down, I had 2 options. I could flip out, get really upset and, you know, kind of what I was probably doing internally, but that would have done a few things. It would have really brought down the vibe of the crew, would have made the pilot feel terrible, but more or less it's not going to achieve anything other than hurting people's feelings. So in that moment, I was actually fortunate enough to be able to look back on an experience I had 4 months earlier. I was on a job with Brad Day from Defy Productions, and there was a situation that happened on set which completely changed the outcome of the shoot. And we had to change course on the spot. Brad just took a second, took a breath and said, all right, this is what we're going to do. So I like to think that that's kind of the approach that I took. And I was like, all right, how do we adapt? So I suppose the lesson to learn from this is just be a good person first and foremost, and have a steady, calm head. There are times to speak and there's times to think. Sometimes you just need to take a deep breath, think before you speak, and then make sure that you're taking everyone else into consideration with what you're about to say. Had I not have had that experience on a set a few months early to be able to look back on, I don't know how I would have reacted. I like to think I'm always trying to look out for people's feelings and be considerate, but I might not have been so calm and I might have been a little bit more frustrated. So fortunately for me, unfortunately for Brad having to go through that, I was very actually gracious to be able to have that experience myself. Keep calm, carry on, all the things that people put on post-it notes. The next lesson comes from a saying that you might have heard that says, don't be afraid to kill your babies. Now, obviously when we're talking about a baby, we're talking about our shot. When we're shooting, we all have our favorite shots, and sometimes they're just meant to be a good shot that's not even meant to make the cut. There are some really good shots in this film that didn't actually make it into the film because they didn't aid the story in any way. But the shot that I'm specifically talking about that we got rid of in this film was actually the interview. Paid for the studio, we built out the set, and we spent 2 hours interviewing Elijah, and we got some really good stuff. But when I got into the edit, I got a little bit overwhelmed. I had 2 hours of audio. I was trying to cut down to like a 2, 3, 4 minute film. I just couldn't make it work. And I realized there was lots of gold in there, but in the moment when we were interviewing, we didn't allow for enough breath. We didn't necessarily ask the right questions, but I knew what the story was. I just couldn't really mold it. So what I did is I got a transcription of the audio. I went through and I cut it down into what I thought the story that Elijah was trying to say was. I sent that to Kim. I got him to make his own version of that. We kind of merged those two together. They had a baby, and that's the script that we kind of came out with. We sent that to Elijah and we said, hey, look, this is our take on the words that you said, and this is the story we think you're trying to tell. Are you cool with it? And would you be down to re-record this? I was keen to get on board and re-record the audio. We just made sure that he said it in his own words and his own language. By re-recording this and making sure that we put the effort in to make sure that story was getting told the way he wanted it to be told, but also how we thought was best to be told in the first place, was absolutely crucial in this turning out the way that it did. If we hadn't gone the extra effort to kind of re-record that last little bit, it just wouldn't have been anywhere near as good. And I'm not gonna lie, it's a super bummer. I was like, man, I really don't want to organize another record session because I just want to get this thing finished. There was a couple deadlines of festivals I wanted to enter it into, but ultimately that little bit of extra pressure to get it done was just what we needed to make, what it turned out to in the end, which I'm really proud of. So if there's something you've put a lot of effort into, whether it's an interview or a clip and you absolutely love it, but it just doesn't aid the story in any way, just don't be afraid to get rid of it or do it again. And the last lesson is that people are always watching. You never know who's watching, when they're watching, and when they're actually gonna reach out and say something, but people are always watching.
Watching, you was asking, always watching.
There are people that have watched my film who have reached out, which are in some pretty cool places, and I'd love to work with them one day. But I guarantee you there's also people who are in far higher places who haven't reached out, who have seen it. They might reach out in 5 years' time when I've done other projects and they go, this guy's got a bit of a track record with doing things the way I like him, let's reach out. You just never know who's watching and when they're gonna reach out. Sometimes it can feel really hard that you're putting all this effort in and you're not getting to where you wanna go. You're not getting the kudos that you thought you were gonna get, or the opportunities haven't come immediately. But just take heart and remember that people are watching. That producer you've wanted to work with has probably seen your film. That director you want to work with has probably watched it twice and probably saved it to a folder of a bit of inspiration. And when he gets a job or she gets a job in 2 years that falls into the line of work that you're typically in, you might just get a phone call. It's really hard to tell yourself that, to stay positive when you haven't received those calls for a while, but just trust me, people are always watching and you never know who is watching. I really hope you've all found it interesting getting a little bit of a behind the scenes look at how we made beautiful motorcycling and learning some of the lessons that I learned along the way. Please, if you haven't seen the film, please go and watch it and leave some feedback for us to make sure that we're better on the next one. Anyway, please go ahead and listen to the band Volumes. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Look, back and I'm better than ever. I think I got a vendetta. Oh, now they call me, I seen them. All of those times getting severed.